Agenda 2030. What is behind it, or rather what goals is the UN pursuing with it? KLA TV has already commented on Agenda 2030 in the program Fraudulent Labeling Agenda 2030, the way the UN is dragging the world into the abyss. How did the 2030 Agenda come about? It originally began with Agenda 21, a UN action program adopted in 1992 that contains concrete recommendations for action in development and environmental policy for the 21st century. With Agenda 2030, adopted by the UN in 2015, the goals of Agenda 21 were further developed and now apply equally to all countries. The current meeting now serves to review the implementation of the 2030 Agenda with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Has the implementation of Agenda 2030 so far shown at all that the UN wants to promote the world community? Or is the implementation gradually leading the world into the abyss, or in other words, into a one-world government? Investigative journalist Thomas Röper comments on the 2030 Agenda in more details in his book Inside Corona. He writes,
"The 2030 Agenda was adopted by the states of the UN, and the fact that there's a separate catalogue of measures in Germany for this already shows a central problem. Each state interprets the goals in its own way."
The following are key points of the 2030 Agenda that should be looked at in more detail. The 16th key point reads, "Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels." Sub-item 16.9 states, "By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration." This point, in example, the creation of a uniform legal or even digital identity for all the people of this world, is already in full swing with ID 2020. ID 2020 plans a transnational digital identity to complement state systems. All information about the individual should come together here. Education and vaccination certificates, financial status, accounts on Facebook, data produced by the smartphone.
That means that the total and ultimate control of the whole mankind is packed in nice words. And the whole thing is not a fantasy or discussion. These are goals decided by the UN, which are being worked on, and billions are being spent on their implementation.
ID 2020 also shows the connection to the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller Foundation is one of the central organizations behind ID 2020.
Funding of the 2030 Agenda.
According to its own information, the UN needs $5 to $7 trillion a year to finance the 2030 Agenda. That is 5,000 to 7,000 billion. By comparison, Germany's annual gross national product is about 4,000 billion. By the way, the UN is financed by the contributions from the member states. According to the UN, in order to provide these huge sums, it needs, among other things, to promote public-private partnerships, another goal of the 2030 Agenda.
Public-private partnerships.
What does this mean when public-private partnerships are to be promoted? Thomas Röper goes into detail about this in his book and writes on page 46,
"It is about giving corporations more influence over the UN, or to put it in geopolitical terms, it is about increasing the power of corporations at the expense of nation-states. The corporations want to make the rules and no longer have to obey the laws of the nation-states. In the long run, they want to disempower nation-states, and especially their parliaments, which can pass disruptive laws. To disguise this erosion of democracy, good-sounding terms like public-private partnership are invented. It reassures the public.
In addition to large corporations, the public-private partnership also aims at increasing the influence of oligarchs. Thomas Röper understands oligarchs as people and organizations that exercise power over a region through their wealth, such as the Rockefeller Foundation and the World Economic Forum. Back in June 2019, the World Economic Forum and the UN signed a strategic partnership agreement to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Thus, various organizations are openly seeking world power through, for example, the UN. This is by no means an exaggeration, according to Röper. Germany, for example, is also actively working on the complete abolition of democracy, as stated in a document from the Federal Ministry of the Interior called the Smart City Charter. This was published in May 2017 and is available to KLA TV. Under the heading Vision of a Hyper-Networked Planet, it is written as point 6,
post-voting society. Because we know exactly what people do and want, there is less need for elections, majority rule or voting. Behavioral data can replace democracy at the society's feedback system.
In the future, people should be digitally recorded and controlled so thoroughly that you can deduct from the data what the majority wants. A reason to no longer have to hold elections or make decisions without elections. Furthermore, the smart city concepts write about the post-ownership society.
Thanks to the information about available shared goods and resources, it makes less sense to own something. Perhaps private property will indeed become a luxury. Data could complement or replace money as a currency.
How on earth can such ideas be published openly? The abolition of democracy or private property would be against the law and should be punished. In fact, according to Thomas Röper, it happens anyway. They have been working on it openly for years. In summary, it can be seen that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are really about a slow but steady increase in the power and influence of the UN, because the states are being disempowered step by step. Democracy and ultimately the nation-states are gradually being abolished. Given the beginnings of the UN and the obvious influence of the Rockefeller Foundation, the question arises, was the creation of a one-world government one of its hidden goals from the very beginning? It now depends on whether the nations wake up and people take their destiny and the fate of their country into their own hands again. The peoples need to know the connections and plans behind the UN and its desired Agenda 2030. So spread this broadcast as widely as you can.